The rejection came on what was supposed to be her wedding day. Iris stood at the altar in her mother's wedding gown, white silk and delicate lace that had taken 3 seamstresses a month to alter. The temple was filled with flowers. The guests were seated. The music had already begun to play, and her betrothed was walking toward her with another woman on his arm. "I'm sorry, Iris." Callum didn't look sorry. He looked relieved, like a man setting down a burden he'd never wanted to carry. "But I've found my true mate. Surely you understand." The woman beside him was everything Iris wasn't. Tall, where Iris was small. Blonde, where Iris was dark. Curves, where Iris was angles. She looked at Iris with a smile that held no apology, only triumph. "These things happen," the woman said sweetly. "Don't take it personally." The whispers started immediately. Guests shifting in their seats, eyes darting between Iris and her replacement with barely concealed glee. This was the scandal of the season, and they had front-row seats. 3 years. Iris's voice came out hollow. "We were betrothed for 3 years. You let me plan this wedding? You let me stand here in front of everyone?" "I didn't know until last week." Callum had the audacity to shrug. "The bond hit me out of nowhere. What was I supposed to do, marry you anyway?" "You could have told me in private. You could have—" She stopped. What was the point? The humiliation was already complete. Every noble family in the territory was watching her fall apart in real time. "Don't be dramatic." Callum's father stepped forward, the pack alpha whose alliance this marriage was supposed to cement. "You're young. You'll find someone else. Women like you are—" He paused, searching for the word. "Replaceable," the blonde finished for him. "That's what he means. You're replaceable, Iris. There are 100 girls who could have stood where you're standing. You just happen to be the one Callum chose first." The word hit her like a physical blow. Replaceable. Like she was a broken tool, a worn-out servant, something to be discarded and forgotten the moment something better came along. She should cry, should scream, should do something to defend what was left of her dignity. Instead, she gathered her skirts in trembling hands and walked out of the temple. No one tried to stop her. No one called her name. She was already forgotten, replaced by the beautiful blonde who had stolen her future with nothing more than a smile and a convenient mating bond. The gardens outside the temple were empty. Everyone was inside, watching the new couple exchange vows that should have been hers. Iris made it to the fountain before her legs gave out, sinking onto the cold stone edge in a puddle of white silk. 3 years. 3 years of planning and hoping and believing that she mattered to someone. All of it erased in a single moment. Replaceable. Maybe they were right. Maybe she'd always been replaceable. The quiet girl, the forgettable one, the daughter her own parents barely noticed. Maybe she'd been fooling herself to think she could ever be anything else. That was barbaric. The voice came from behind her, deep and rough and utterly unfamiliar. Iris spun around, nearly falling off the fountain's edge. The man standing at the garden's entrance was enormous, 7 feet of broad shoulders and raw power, dressed in black formal clothes that did nothing to soften his intimidating presence. His hair was dark, streaked with silver at the temples. His face was hard and angular, carved from stone and shadow. But his eyes, those amber eyes, burned with something that looked like rage. "Who are you?" Iris asked. Someone who just watched a woman be publicly humiliated for the crime of being loyal. He moved closer, each step deliberate and controlled. "I came to this territory to discuss an alliance with Alpha Vance. I didn't expect to witness his son behave like a coward. You're the Lycan king. The realization hit her like cold water. She'd heard he was visiting. It was part of why today's wedding had been so elaborate. But she'd never expected to actually meet him. I'm sorry you had to see that. It must have been uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? His expression darkened. I watched a man abandon his betrothed at the altar and let his new woman call her replaceable to her face. That wasn't uncomfortable. That was unconscionable. Iris didn't know what to say. No one had ever been angry on her behalf before. It doesn't matter, she said finally. They're right. I'm nobody special. Just a minor noble's daughter who happened to be convenient for an alliance. Now that Callum has his true mate, I'm… She couldn't finish the sentence. You're what? Worthless. Forgettable. The king stopped directly in front of her, so close she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Is that what you believe? It's what I know. Then you know nothing. His voice softened, but lost none of its intensity. I've been alive for 400 years. I've met thousands of people, nobles, servants, warriors, scholars. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that what I just witnessed in that temple had nothing to do with your worth. You don't know me. I know that you stood at that altar with your head held high, while the man who should have protected you tore your future apart. I know that you didn't beg, or plead, or make a scene. I know that you walked out of that temple with more dignity than everyone inside it combined. His amber eyes burned into hers. That's not replaceable. That's extraordinary. Iris's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, wanted so desperately to see herself the way he seemed to see her, but she'd been fooled before. Why do you care? She asked. I'm nothing to you, a stranger you happen to see cry at a fountain. Because my wolf won't stop howling your name. He said it simply without hesitation. Because I felt something snap into place the moment I saw you walking down that aisle, and nothing has made sense since. Because you're not a stranger, Iris. You're my mate. The words hung in the air between them. Impossible, ridiculous. The kind of thing that happened in fairy tales, not to forgettable women abandoned at their own weddings. That can't be right, she whispered. And yet here we are. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Fate has a sense of humor, it seems. The woman they called replaceable turns out to be the one thing I've spent 4 centuries searching for. Before Iris could respond, footsteps echoed from the temple entrance. She turned to see Callum and his father striding toward them, the blonde nowhere in sight. Your Majesty. Alpha Vance's voice was oily with false respect. I apologize for the disruption to your visit. This girl was supposed to be married today, but as you saw, circumstances changed. I assure you she's nobody important, just a minor inconvenience that's been resolved. Resolved? The king's voice went cold. Is that what you call publicly humiliating a woman on what should have been the happiest day of her life? She'll recover. Women like her always do. Vance waved a dismissive hand. She's replaceable. Surely you understand. There are dozens of girls who could fill her role. The king smiled. It was not a kind smile. Replaceable? He reached down and took Iris's hand, pulling her gently to her feet. Then replace a queen. The silence that followed was deafening. I'm sorry, Vance stammered. Did you say queen? The king's arm came around Iris's waist, pulling her against his side. This woman is my fated mate, which means that by tonight she will be queen of the Lycan kingdom. And you… His amber eyes turned to ice. You just told your future queen that she was replaceable." Vance's face went white. Callum looked like he might be sick. But Iris felt something crack open in her chest. Something that had been locked away since she was a child, since she first learned that quiet girls got overlooked and forgettable women got left behind. Hope. Terrifying. Impossible. Absolutely undeniable hope. The king's name was Theron. She learned it in the carriage that carried them away from the territory that had never wanted her. "You don't have to do this," Iris said, watching the temple disappear through the window. Her wedding gown was still on. There hadn't been time to change, and the white silk seemed to mock her with every mile. The mate bond, the queen announcement, you could take it all back. Say you were making a point. I wouldn't blame you. "Do you want me to take it back?" The question caught her off guard. "What I want doesn't matter. I'm trying to give you an out." "I don't want an out." Theron sat across from her, his massive frame taking up most of the carriage's interior. "I told you the truth back there. You're my mate. My wolf recognized you the moment I saw you, and nothing that's happened since has changed that. You saw me get rejected at my own wedding. That's not exactly a promising start. I saw you handle cruelty with grace. I saw you refuse to break even when everyone expected you to." His amber eyes held hers. "That's exactly the kind of person I've been waiting for." Iris didn't know how to respond. 24 years of being overlooked hadn't prepared her for someone who actually saw her. "What happens now?" she asked instead. "Now we go to my kingdom. You'll have chambers of your own, servants to attend you, anything you need." He paused. "And time. As much time as you need to decide if this is what you want." "You're giving me a choice?" "I'm giving you every choice." His voice softened. "The mate bond isn't a cage, Iris. It's an invitation. One you're free to decline if you don't want this." "And if I decline? What happens to me then?" "Then I'll set you up with a home, an income, and complete independence. You'll never have to rely on anyone who treats you as disposable again." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "I'm not trying to trap you. I'm trying to show you that you have options. Real ones, not the scraps other people decided you deserved." Something in Iris's chest cracked further. She'd spent her whole life being told what she was worth, by parents who barely noticed her, by a betrothed who saw her as a placeholder, by a society that measured women in terms of their usefulness. And now, this ancient king was offering her something no one ever had: freedom. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that for someone you just met?" "Because you're my mate, and even if you choose to walk away, that doesn't change what I feel." His hand came up, hovering near her face but not quite touching. "I've waited 400 years to find you, Iris. I can wait a little longer for you to trust me." The journey to the Lycan kingdom took 3 days. 3 days of private meals in the carriage, of conversations that started stilted and grew easier, of learning who this man was beneath the crown. Theron was not what she'd expected. The stories painted him as ruthless, a warrior king who had crushed rebellions and conquered territories without mercy. And maybe that was true. But the man who sat across from her quoted poetry, argued about philosophy, and once spent an entire afternoon teaching her a card game his mother had invented. He was also patient. Devastatingly, impossibly patient. He never pushed for physical contact, never assumed she wanted his presence. Every evening, he asked if she'd like to dine alone, and every evening, he accepted her answer without complaint, whether that answer was yes or no. It was disorienting. Iris had spent 3 years with Callum, and she couldn't remember him ever asking what she wanted. "Can I ask you something?" she said on the third night, when the carriage was hours from the castle and the stars were beginning to emerge. "Anything. Why didn't you have a mate before now? You're 400 years old. There must have been women who—" She stopped, unsure how to finish. Threw themselves at me? Offered themselves for political advantage? Pretended the bond existed when it didn't? A wry smile crossed his face. Hundreds, maybe thousands, over the centuries. But the bond isn't something you can fake. Either it's there or it isn't. And for 400 years, it wasn't. That must have been lonely. It was. He said it simply, without self-pity. I watched my friends find their mates, watched them build families, grow old together, experience something I was beginning to think fate had denied me. His amber eyes found hers. And then I walked into a temple in a territory I'd never planned to visit, and saw a woman in a white dress walking toward a man who didn't deserve her. And everything changed. You felt the bond immediately? Even then? The moment I saw your face, before I knew your name, before I knew what was about to happen, I felt my wolf wake up for the first time in centuries and say, there she is. Finally. Iris's throat tightened. And you just knew? I knew. He reached across the carriage and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her since helping her into the vehicle 3 days ago, and the warmth of his palm sent something electric through her veins. I know this is overwhelming. I know you have no reason to trust me, or the bond, or anything else after what you've been through. But I want you to understand something. What? You were never replaceable. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Not to me. The moment I saw you, you became the only woman in the world. There is no substitute, no alternative, no one else who could ever take your place. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know enough. He squeezed her hand gently. I know you've been taught to make yourself small. I know you've been treated like an afterthought by people who should have treasured you. I know you walked out of that temple with your head held high, even though your heart was breaking. His voice dropped. I know that you're braver than you believe, stronger than you know, and worth more than anyone has ever told you. Iris felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't cried since the fountain, had refused to give anyone that satisfaction, but something about his words cracked through the wall she'd built. I don't know how to be what you're describing, she said. I've spent my whole life being forgettable, being the one people leave behind. I don't know how to be a queen. You don't have to know. Theron lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. You just have to be yourself. The rest we'll figure out together. The carriage crested a hill, and suddenly the castle was visible. A massive structure of dark stone and glowing windows, more beautiful and terrifying than anything Iris had ever seen. Her new home, if she chose to claim it. I'm scared, she admitted. I know. Theron's hand remained wrapped around hers. But you don't have to be scared alone. Not anymore. She looked at the castle, at the man who had plucked her from her lowest moment and offered her a crown, at the future stretching out before her, uncertain and terrifying and full of possibility. She was still scared, but for the first time in her life, she was also hopeful. And that, she realized, was enough to begin. 2 weeks into her new life, Iris discovered that the Lycan king kept a garden, not a formal garden, with sculpted hedges and geometric flower beds. A wild one, tucked behind the castle's east wing, where roses, tangled with honeysuckle and herbs, grew in chaotic abundance. She'd found it by accident, wandering the grounds while Theron attended to matters of state. She was sitting on a stone bench, surrounded by the scent of lavender, when he found her. "You discovered my secret," he said, settling onto the bench beside her. "This was my mother's garden. She planted it when I was a child. I've been tending it ever since she died." "You garden?" Iris couldn't hide her surprise. The fearsome Lycan king, on his knees in the dirt. Even fearsome kings need something that grows. A smile ghosted across his face. The crown is death and politics and impossible decisions. This, he gestured at the tangle of green around them. This is life, simple and honest, and completely unconcerned with power. Iris looked at him, really looked, and saw something she hadn't noticed before. Exhaustion, hidden beneath the strength. Loneliness, buried under centuries of rule. The weight of a kingdom pressing down on shoulders that had carried it far too long without help. "You're tired," she said softly. "I've been tired for 300 years. He said it without complaint, just stating a fact. The first century was excitement, the second was duty, the third was— He paused, searching for the word. Endurance. Waking up each day and doing what needed to be done because there was no one else to do it. And now? Now I have hope." His amber eyes found hers. "For the first time in longer than I can remember, I have something to look forward to beyond the next crisis." "Because of the mate bond? Because of you?" He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "The bond is part of it. But it's not just the bond that makes me want to be near you. It's who you are, the way you notice things others miss, the way you ask questions instead of making assumptions, the way you're learning to take up space instead of shrinking into corners." Iris's breath caught. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. I've watched you these past 2 weeks. When you first arrived, you apologized for everything, for existing in a room, for having opinions, for wanting anything at all. But you're doing it less now. You're starting to believe you have a right to be here." She wanted to deny it. But he was right. Something had shifted since she'd arrived at the castle. The servants treated her with respect. The advisors sought her opinion. And Theron. Theron looked at her like she mattered, every single day, until she'd started to wonder if maybe she did. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Always." "When I was betrothed to Callum, I spent 3 years trying to be what he wanted. I changed my hair, my clothes, the way I spoke. I made myself smaller and quieter and more agreeable, because I thought that's what he needed." Her voice cracked. "And none of it mattered. He still left. He still chose someone else. I still wasn't enough." "You were too much." Theron's hand cupped her face, turning her toward him. "That's the truth you haven't seen yet. You weren't replaced because you were lacking. You were replaced because he couldn't handle how much you are." "That doesn't make sense." "Doesn't it?" His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You're intelligent, Iris. You see through pretense. You ask hard questions and expect honest answers. For a man like Callum, a man who needed to feel superior, that must have been terrifying. So he found someone who would worship him instead of challenge him. You make it sound like his weakness, not mine." "Because it was." His voice hardened. "He didn't leave because you weren't enough. He left because you were too much for him to handle. That's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of his limitations." Iris felt something shift in her chest. a piece of the story she'd been telling herself, the one where she was always the problem, always the one who fell short, rearranging into something new. "I've never thought of it that way," she whispered. "I know, because the people around you spent 24 years teaching you to blame yourself for their failures." Theron's forehead came to rest against hers. "But you're not with them anymore. You're with me. And I need you to understand something." "What?" "I don't want you to be small. I don't want you to be quiet or agreeable or any of the things they told you to be." His breath was warm against her lips. "I want you to be exactly who you are. Brilliant and questioning and complicated and real. I want all of you, Iris. Not a diminished version. Not a performance. You." The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. "I don't know who that is. I've been pretending for so long. I don't remember what's real." "Then we'll find out together." He pulled back just enough to look at her, his amber eyes bright with something that made her heart pound. "Every day, you can try being a little more yourself. And every day, I'll be here to remind you that whoever you discover is exactly who I've been waiting for." "You can't know that. What if who I really am is someone you don't want?" "Impossible." He said it with absolute certainty. "My wolf chose you, not the version you showed Callum, not the mask you wore for your parents. The real you, the one buried underneath all that survival. That's the person the bond recognized. That's the person I'm falling for." Falling. The word hit her like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Theron, you don't have to say anything." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You don't have to feel what I feel, or move any faster than you're ready for. I just needed you to know." But she did feel it. That was the terrifying truth she'd been running from since the moment he'd found her at that fountain. She felt the bond pulling at her, felt her heart crack open every time he looked at her like she was precious, felt something ancient and undeniable stirring to life in her chest. She'd spent her whole life being left behind, being replaced, being told she wasn't enough. And here was a man who looked at her like she was everything. "I'm falling too," she whispered. "I'm terrified, and I don't trust it, and part of me is still waiting for you to realize you made a mistake. But I'm falling anyway." Theron's breath shuddered out. "Iris, kiss me." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Please, before I lose my nerve and convince myself this isn't real." He didn't hesitate. His mouth found hers with a tenderness that made her want to weep, soft and questioning and achingly gentle. He kissed her like she was something precious, like she was something worth waiting 400 years for. When they finally broke apart, Iris was trembling. "Still think you're replaceable?" Theron murmured against her lips. "I'm starting to have doubts." He laughed, a real laugh, warm and startled and completely free. "Good. I plan to spend the rest of my life removing those doubts entirely." She kissed him again, there in his mother's garden, surrounded by wild roses and honeysuckle, and the promise of something she'd never dared to hope for. She wasn't replaceable. She was chosen, and for the first time in her life, she was starting to believe it. The past arrived on a Tuesday, dressed in expensive clothes and wearing the face of a man she'd once thought she loved. Iris was in the Great Hall, reviewing trade agreements with Theron's advisors, a task he'd trusted her with after discovering her talent for finding loopholes, when the doors burst open and Callum strode through like he owned the place. "There you are." His smile was exactly as she remembered, charming on the surface, calculating underneath. I've been looking for you everywhere. Iris rose slowly, her hands steady even as her heart raced. What are you doing here? I came to bring you home, of course. He moved toward her, arms outstretched, as if the last month hadn't happened, as if he hadn't humiliated her in front of everyone she knew. This has gone on long enough, Iris. The joke is over. The joke? Playing house with the Lycan king. Callum's laugh was dismissive. We both know this isn't real. He felt sorry for you. Anyone would have, watching that disaster at the altar. But surely you don't think he actually wants you? Something cold settled in Iris's stomach. The old doubts, the ones she'd been fighting for weeks, stirred to life. His Majesty isn't here, one of the advisors said stiffly. You weren't announced. You should leave. I'll leave when I have what I came for. Callum's eyes swept over Iris with the proprietary gaze she remembered so well. Serena left me. Her mating bond turned out to be a ploy to get close to my father's money. The marriage has been annulled. And that's my problem how? It means we can be together again. He said it like he was offering her a gift. I know I made a mistake. I know I hurt you. But I'm here now, ready to make things right. Make things right. Iris's voice came out sharper than she expected. You humiliated me in front of my entire world. You let another woman call me replaceable to my face. And now you expect me to… What? Forget all of it because your first choice didn't work out? Don't be dramatic. Callum stepped closer, and Iris stood her ground. We both know you don't belong here. You're not queen material. You're… Careful. Theron's voice cut through the hall like a blade. The next words out of your mouth had better be an apology. He emerged from the side entrance, moving with the controlled violence of a predator who'd just spotted prey. His amber eyes were fixed on Callum with an intensity that made the younger man stumble backward. Your Majesty. Callum recovered quickly, pasting on a diplomatic smile. I was just explaining to Iris that this arrangement can end now. I'm prepared to take her off your hands. Off my hands? Theron's voice was deceptively soft. Is that what you think she is? A burden to be passed around? I meant no disrespect. But surely you understand. She was my betrothed first. We had an understanding. And now that my situation has resolved, I'm prepared to honor our original agreement. The agreement you broke when you rejected her at the altar? A mistake I regret deeply. Callum's eyes slid to Iris, calculating. I know I hurt you. I know I was wrong. But we can start fresh. Go back to how things were before. Before? Iris heard herself laugh, a sharp, bright sound that surprised even her. Before what? Before you made me feel invisible for 3 years? Before you let me plan a wedding you never intended to attend? Before you proved that I was nothing to you but a convenient placeholder? Iris. No. The word came out strong, certain. I spent 3 years trying to be what you wanted. I made myself smaller, quieter, more agreeable. And you know what I learned? It was never going to be enough, because the problem wasn't me, Callum. The problem was that you couldn't handle someone who expected you to be more than mediocre. Callum's face reddened. You're being ridiculous. The Lycan king can't actually want you. Look at yourself. You're nothing special. You're… She's my mate. Theron's arm came around Iris's waist, pulling her against his side. She's my queen. And if you call her nothing special, one more time, I'm going to rip out your throat and use it as a decoration. The colour drained from Callum's face. You can't be serious. She's ordinary. She's She's extraordinary. Theron's voice was fierce. She's intelligent and brave and more valuable than 100 men like you. She walked out of your pathetic wedding with more dignity than you'll ever possess. She spent the past month proving to everyone in this castle that she belongs here. Not because of me, but because of who she is. This is insane. Callum's composure was cracking. You're throwing away an alliance with my father's territory for a woman who can't even— I'm not throwing away anything. I'm choosing something better. Theron smiled, and it was terrifying. Your father's territory means nothing to me. I have more land than I can govern, more power than I can use. What I didn't have was someone to share it with. And now I do. She's replaceable, Callum spat. You said it yourself at the wedding. There are hundreds of women who could stand in her place. I never said that. Your father did. Your blonde replacement did. Theron's grip on Iris tightened. And they were wrong. There is no one who could replace Iris. There is no one who could stand in her place. She is singular, irreplaceable, the only woman in 400 years whom my wolf has recognized as worthy. Iris's throat tightened. She'd heard him say versions of this before, in private, in the garden, in quiet moments when they were alone. But hearing it now, in front of Callum, in front of the advisors, in front of everyone, it felt like a declaration of war against everything she'd ever believed about herself. Go home, Callum, she said. There's nothing for you here. You can't be serious. You're choosing him over me. I'm choosing myself. The words came out steadier than she felt. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing what I want. And what I want is to stay here, with someone who sees me. Someone who makes me feel like I matter. Someone who would never— Her voice cracked just once. Who would never make me feel replaceable. Callum stared at her like he'd never seen her before. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe the Iris who had stood at that altar, quiet and small and desperate to please, had been a stranger even to herself. You'll regret this, he said finally, when he gets tired of you, when he realizes what you really are. That's enough. Theron's voice dropped to a growl. Leave. Now. Before I forget that diplomacy requires keeping you alive. Callum left. He didn't bow, didn't apologize, didn't look back. Just walked out of the great hall with the stiff-legged gait of a man who'd finally realized he'd lost something he'd never deserved. The door closed behind him. The advisors quietly excused themselves. And then it was just Iris and Theron, alone in the echoing hall. I'm sorry, Iris whispered. I'm sorry he came here. I'm sorry you had to— Don't apologize. Theron turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face. You have nothing to be sorry for. You were magnificent. I was terrified. You were brave. There's a difference. He pressed his forehead to hers. You stood up to him. You claimed your own worth. Do you have any idea how proud I am of you? Tears stung her eyes. I almost believed him. When he said you couldn't really want me. I will spend every day of my life proving him wrong. Theron's voice was fierce. Every day, Iris, until you never doubt it again. Then claim me. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Make it official. Make it permanent. Make it so that no one, not Callum, not my parents, not anyone, can ever question whether I belong here. Are you sure? The claiming bond is forever. I know. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I want forever. I want you. I want to stop being afraid that this will disappear, that I'll wake up and find out it was all a dream. Theron made a sound low in his throat. half growl, half groan, and then his mouth was on hers. The kiss was fire and promise, and 400 years of waiting finally reaching its end. When his lips moved to her neck, when she felt the sharp press of his teeth against her pulse point, she didn't flinch. She tilted her head back and let him claim her. The bite was brief. The bond that followed was eternal. Warmth spreading through her veins, awareness of him flooding her senses, the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Mine, Theron breathed against her skin. Yours, she agreed. Finally and forever. She was claimed. She was loved. She was irreplaceable. And no one would ever make her doubt it again. The coronation took place on the anniversary of her almost wedding. Theron had offered to choose a different date, something without painful memories attached. But Iris had insisted. She wanted to reclaim the day, wanted to transform it from the worst moment of her life into the best. She stood before the great hall in a gown of deep violet silk, not white, never white again, with silver thread woven through the bodice like captured starlight. A crown rested on her head, delicate silver set with amethysts that caught the torchlight and scattered it like dreams. The claiming mark on her neck was visible to everyone. She'd designed the dress that way. Let them see. Let them know exactly what she was. Queen, mate, irreplaceable. You're stunning, Theron murmured, standing beside her at the front of the hall. His amber eyes swept over her with an appreciation that still made her blush, even after months of marriage. I'm terrified. You always say that, and then you're magnificent anyway. He took her hand, squeezing gently. Are you ready? She looked out at the assembled crowd. Nobles from every territory in the kingdom gathered to witness her coronation. Advisors who had once wondered if she belonged, now looking at her with respect. Servants who had watched her transform from a frightened refugee into a queen who knew her own worth. And in the back, required by diplomatic protocol to attend, stood Alpha Vance and his son. Callum looked terrible. The past year had not been kind to him. His father's territory had crumbled after Theron refused to renew their trade agreements, and no other pack would ally with a family known for humiliating their future queen. The man who had once called her replaceable now stood in borrowed clothes, watching her wear a crown he'd never imagined she could claim. I'm ready, Iris said. The ceremony was simple. Lycan traditions didn't require elaborate rituals, just the acknowledgement of the bond, the presentation of the crown, and the declaration before witnesses. But when Theron placed that crown on her head and turned to face the crowd, Iris felt the weight of it settle into her bones. She belonged here, not because Theron had rescued her, not because fate had intervened, because she had chosen to believe she was worth something, and then spent every day proving it. My queen, Theron announced, his voice ringing through the hall. My mate, my equal in all things. The crowd erupted into cheers. Nobles bowed, advisors applauded. And Iris stood tall, finally understanding what it meant to take up space instead of shrinking into corners. When the formal ceremony ended, when the music started and the celebration began, Theron led her to the thrones at the head of the hall. He sat first, then pulled her down onto his lap. Improper, undignified, and absolutely perfect. Theron. Her face burned. Everyone is watching. Let them watch. His arms wrapped around her waist. Let them see their queen on her king's lap. Let them see that I value you above protocol, above tradition, above everything except your happiness. She should have argued, should have insisted on propriety. Instead, She leaned back against his chest and smiled. The celebration continued for hours. Iris danced, something she'd never done at formal events before, always too afraid of drawing attention, and laughed with nobles who had once ignored her existence. She accepted congratulations with grace, answered questions with confidence, and slowly realized that the woman she'd been a year ago would never recognize who she'd become. It was near midnight when the messenger arrived. Theron was refilling her wineglass when a guard approached and whispered something in his ear. His expression flickered. Surprise, then satisfaction, then something that looked almost like vindication. "What is it?" Iris asked. "News from Vance's territory." He set down the wine and turned to face her. "It seems Callum attempted to claim another woman last month. A merchant's daughter, much like you were. Quiet, overlooked, desperate for someone to notice her." Iris's stomach tightened. "And?" "She refused him." Theron's smile was fierce. "Apparently word of how he treated you has spread. No family will allow their daughters near him. No pack will negotiate alliances. He's become—" He paused, savoring the irony. "Unmarriageable. That seems fitting. There's more. His father's territory has formally requested absorption into the kingdom. They can no longer sustain themselves without trade agreements." Theron's amber eyes held hers. "Alpha Vance will be stripped of his title. He'll spend the rest of his life as a minor landholder, watching the woman he called Replaceable rule from the throne he once hoped to influence." Iris waited for satisfaction, for triumph, for some sense of vindication at the downfall of the people who had hurt her so deeply. Instead, she felt something closer to peace. "I don't need revenge," she said quietly. "I don't need them to suffer. I just needed to know that I wasn't what they said I was." "You never were." Theron pressed a kiss to her temple. "You were always extraordinary. They just couldn't see it." She leaned into his warmth, watching the celebration continue around them. The music swelled, the candles blazed, and somewhere in the crowd, Callum was watching her shine in a way he'd never allowed her to shine with him. She hoped he understood, finally, what he'd lost. Not because she wanted him to suffer, but because she wanted him to know that the woman he'd called replaceable had become irreplaceable to an entire kingdom. 3 years later, Iris stood in Theron's mother's garden with a daughter in her arms. The child had her father's amber eyes and her mother's dark hair. She was barely 2 years old, but already she commanded attention. Bright and curious and absolutely certain of her place in the world. She would never know what it felt like to be overlooked, would never learn to make herself small, would never hear the word replaceable and believe it applied to her. That was the gift Iris could give her, the knowledge, from the very beginning, that she was worthy of love. "She has your spirit," Theron said, settling onto the bench beside them. His arm came around Iris's shoulders, pulling her close. Stubborn and fierce, and completely unwilling to be ignored. "She has your confidence." Iris pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "I hope she never loses it." "She won't. Not with you as her mother." Theron's hand came up to cup her face, turning her toward him. "Have I told you lately how grateful I am that I walked into that temple?" "Every day." "Good. Because I mean it every day." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Iris. The answer to 400 years of waiting. The end of a loneliness I'd stopped believing would ever lift. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, too." She smiled, and it felt easy now, natural in a way it hadn't been for most of her life. "You showed me who I could be, who I was always meant to be." You showed yourself. I just gave you a safe place to do it. Their daughter made an impatient sound, demanding attention. Iris laughed and shifted the child in her arms, letting Theron press a kiss to her tiny hand. She thought about the woman she'd been, the one who had stood at that altar in her mother's wedding gown, watching her future crumble. The one who had believed she was replaceable because everyone in her life had treated her that way. That woman was gone now, not erased, never erased, but transformed, healed, made whole by a king who had looked at her lowest moment and seen not a burden to be pitied, but a treasure to be claimed. Replaceable, they had called her. 100 girls could stand in her place. But no one could replace a queen. No one could replace a mate. No one could replace the woman who had found her worth in amber eyes and gentle hands, and the unwavering certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. She was irreplaceable. She had always been irreplaceable. She just needed someone to help her see it. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new tale of fated mates, fierce kings, and the women who capture their hearts. Until next time.